Hi, I'm Limo Milan. In this video, we're going to look at the mixing environment of Ableton Live. So, there are two ways we can view the same parameters, and it's based around the two different workflows that we have. One is the arrangement view, which if we click the switching tab there, is our linear layout. We have our tracks running down in rows, and we have additional sections, including our auxiliary or return tracks as they're labeled in Ableton Live, our auxiliary effects, and then we have a master, or what's sometimes referred to as a mix bus, at the bottom here. But for the purposes of this tutorial, I'm going to stick in session view, and I'll explain immediately why. If you think about a studio mixing desk or even a DJ mixer, it tends to be that the channels run up and away from you, and once you've learned one of them, no matter how many there are, you know how each one works because they're the same thing. Session view has the same layout as a mixing desk, so it's much easier to navigate. So although I can always go to arrangement view or be working in arrangement view and go and adjust the level of a track, mute a track, solo a track, record arm a track, turn up sends to different return tracks and auxiliary tracks, I can do it all here, but for your mind and the workflow of the signal, it makes a lot more sense to stay in this environment. So, going off what I just said, which is multiple versions of the same track is easy to understand once you understand one of them. Let's have a look at one track. So at the moment, if I solo this using the solo button, this is my drum track. Okay, so working our way from the top to the bottom, at the top is about sequencing and looping and playing back the source sound for this track. This is our actual launching section. But as soon as we go below these kind of little launch rectangles, this is our mixing environment. So what we have here are quite a few different sections to the mixer, and also we have some kind of show hide functions where, based on how much you want to see at any time or how much screen space you have available at any time, you can choose what you will or will not see. So first we move over to the right, and these are our show high view buttons. So we have an input and output section where we choose how audio will come into a channel, or MIDI actually, MIDI signals coming into a track. And then we have a send section, which is all about sending a copy of a signal elsewhere within the mixer. A return section, which you notice these two tracks disappear here, and that's where we might have those other versions of a signal sent to. And then we have our mixing environment, which is our M here. And we have a delay section, which is to do about either making tracks go further ahead of time or behind in time. And then for those who like to use Ableton Live as a DJing tool, we have a crossfader assignment section as well. So what we need to see, we don't need the crossfader, we don't need the track delay, but we do want to see the mixer section, the sends and returns, and the input and output section, or what's commonly referred to as I/O section. So on an audio track, it says audio from. Now, when you want to record, this is very important. You choose what source you want to record from, whether it's from another track inside your project and you just want to re-record it elsewhere, or whether it's an external microphone you've plugged into your audio interface and you need to get that into the Ableton Live mixing environment. The out to section is where the sound from that track is going to go to. So in most cases, that will go to the next section, which is our master track, and that's the summing track. So it takes the mix and blend of all these different sound sources and eventually runs out of two different channels, a left and a right channel, to your speaker or your headphone environment. That's also where you send the signal when you want to turn this finished project into an audio recording that you can then, play in a DJ set or give to your friends and so on as well. So looking at the rest of the the channel strip running down, after we've sent the signal onto the master track, we have auxiliary sends here, which go to what's referred to as return tracks in Ableton Live. And this will send a copy of my drums to this return track here. So let me show you how that works. At the moment, none of this signal is going to the return track in return track A. This is an amount dial, and I can feed an increasing amount of my drum signal to that other destination where my reverb will sit. So if I just play this, you'll notice that the signal playing on my channel is not altering, it's still showing the same levels, bouncing in time to the rhythm. But the signal level on this return track, as we hear more and more reverb, is increasing. So we are starting to both visually see that the signal's appearing somewhere else, as well as hearing the results of that signal being somewhere else. So let me explain what's going on with the signal. This dial here is making a copy of my original drum sound, and then that is feeding to this track here. On that track, if I click on it and see the device view, is a reverb. And then that reverb, its output is going to the out2 section of our return track, which is going to our master track. So that means that this sound is going to our master track. We're sending a copy of that sound as well to where this reverb lives, and then that reverb also goes to our master track as well. So we hear a combination of those two things. Now, we can do something different to get a similar effect. I can grab a reverb from my audio effects, and I can drop that onto the drum track. And now, very similar sound to what was there before. The difference is, what I'm doing there is I'm inserting an audio effect onto one track. So my drums go in, the processing happens from the reverb, and then a blend of that signal with the original signal comes out, but it all happens in one track. So the disadvantages of this is I can't have one reverb in my project and send multiple instruments to that one reverb. I'd have to drag a reverb to every single track to get this effect. That has some advantages, as in you get a lot of control to the reverb on each individual track, but it's also a big headache because if you make a change of heart as to what type of reverb you want to have, it's every track you have to go to make those modifications. And in terms of the way our brains work, in most cases, if your mix that you're making to try and finesse and best present the work that you've done, if it sounds like it's coming from 5 different rooms, it's not going to sound very natural to your ears. So it's a good idea to have a reverb on a return track. You decide what's appropriate for your song, and then you feed a different amount of reverb from these different sound sources to that one reverb. And that way, the brain can hear the mix as like a collection of instruments sitting in one environment at the same time. The other advantage of doing it that way over having a different reverb for every track is if you've got a song with 30 tracks in it, that's 30 reverbs putting a lot of demand on the processing power of your computer. So unless you have a very, very hard reason to decide that that's how you want to do it, sharing a reverb using these return tracks and these auxiliary sends is a good way to go. So as well as a reverb, we have send B, and if by default in the Ableton Live template, if we go to return track B, it's a delay line. So you'll hear this very clearly on the drums because you'll hear different rhythms. And again, we've got confirmation visually of where these sound signals are. So we've still got the original sound on the drum track, and then we also have the copy of the sound feeding that return track B, going through that delay line, and then we're hearing the combination of those two sounds at the same time. The final thing, so we've looked at inserts and auxiliaries. The final thing to be aware of is this master track. It's where everything gets summed, as I've mentioned before. All those multiple sound sources eventually all go through these 2 channels on the master track, our stereo left and right. But this is also another place where effects can be added. So if you ever hear of people mastering music, which is the very final finesse and processing for that, that's somewhere where you can plonk's not a technical word, but we can place different processing onto the master track to try and finish our music. So a final part of the mixing environment is where we will place each one of these sound sources in that final master track. If you remember before, I was saying there's a left and a right channel to the master track. That's our stereo image. That's different information sometimes in the left signal to the right signal that gives us a sense of space. Now there's various ways we can create that effect, but the simplest way is using the panorama or the pan control, which will put more of the signal in one speaker or more of the signal in the other speaker, or if we don't want it panned, an equal amount to both the left and the right. So our ears just hear the signal in the middle of the mix. So if I show you that in terms of some of these other aspects we've got going on here, Just where the actual channel faders are, where we can balance the levels of our signal, we can pan out the sounds to the different portions of the master track and create a sense of space. So I've ever so slightly pushed out some of these melodic elements more to one side than the other, and tried to then grab another sound and make sure that it kind of goes the other way, so there's still a sense of balance between these tracks. But that's the basic way to go about creating a more stereo sounding mix and having things less just down the middle and having certain elements panned out to different sides by different amounts. So to recap, in this video, we've looked at the mixing environment overall. We've looked at the show hide function to reveal or hide certain aspects of the mixing environment. Then we've looked at sending a copy of a signal with an auxiliary send to a return track to create aspects of reverb or delay. We've also looked at insert effects by dragging processing on the actual track itself. We've also looked at the in and out routing of our audio pathway to know where things can come from or go to. And finally, we've looked at the panorama aspect, so panning signals to different portions of our stereo master track.